I'm author and critic David Agranoff. I'm a horror and science fiction author, critic, and researcher. In this podcast, I wanted to provide in-depth interviews and panel discussions with everyone from New York Times bestselling authors to researchers, musicians, and anyone I find interesting. Welcome to Postcards from a Dying World. Hello and welcome to another special episode of Postcards from a Dying World. This is the fourth in the special mini-series promoting the release of The Last Night to Kill Nazis. And this, now we're getting down to the wire. The book comes out next month. So you'll be able to get your Nazi killing on with me next month. At bookstores everywhere. It should be anywhere where books are available, and if they don't have it, request it. And
pre-order it.
Yeah, and
pre-order makes a difference.
Yeah, and I do want to comment that you can pre-order signed copies from one of three bookstores: Mysterious Galaxies in San Diego, California, Artifact Books in Encinitas, California, and Dark Delicacies in Los Angeles, in Burbank, California, because we're doing a mini book tour to promote The Last Night to Kill Nazis in September, the 14th through the 17th. That will be San Diego on the 14th, September 14th, and on the 16th in Encinitas and the 17th in Los Angeles. And those are all three really cool bookstores, so that's a great way to buy the book. And if you pre-order it and then wait till after the signing event, they'll ship it to you. That means you'd have to wait an extra month. So that might not be the best plan. But if you order from Mysterious Galaxies, that's in my neighborhood, I'll ride over and sign it before the release. Because it's bike riding distance for me. And so that's coming up in September. I will also be at the San Diego Festival of Books. Maybe not the whole day, but a good chunk of the day at the Horror Writers Association table, because I am officially joining the HWA for the first time ever. So I've always been a fan of the HWA, but I'm joining soon. So in our last episode of the miniseries on World War II movies, we watched Five Graves to Cairo and Army of Shadows with another IU grad there, Marc Rothenberg, David Woken. And I highly recommend watching those episodes or watching those movies and getting into that episode. That one relates a lot to the or was part of the inspiration for the kind of the backstory of some of the characters in Last Night to Kill Nazis. Cross of Iron is one of the few movies on here that really wasn't an influence, but just one I wanted to talk about because it's weird. But my guests today for Cross of Iron and The Dirty Dozen, returning. Both were in this series before. I don't believe you guys were together. This is the first time you guys are meeting each other. Dino Parenti, tell the folks who you are and what you do.
Hello everyone. I am Dino Parenti. By day, I am an architectural draftsman, and by night and every other moment I get, I am reading or writing horror, crime, and other sort of dark literary stories. And I've always loved World War II films, which have rarely tied in anything I've written, but it's just a separate genre that I've always enjoyed. So glad to be here.
Right. And Dino was a part of our Where Eagles Dare episode with Kelly's Heroes.
Mm-hmm.
And returning from our Navarone panel, Judge Marc Rothenberg. But Mark is a regular guest on my show, does my annual best of reading list with me. my oldest horror nerd friend. Mark, tell the folks who you are, what you
I'm
do.
I'm Marc Rothenberg, and the name is sort of not just an avatar. I am actually a criminal court judge. And when I'm not doing that day job, like Dino, I'm reading, writing, playing games, viewing genre films. I'm still a nerd. I have not changed in the 30 some years since I met David. So
Yeah. Yeah, Mark is one of the most serious horror nerds I know. Uh always a part of the best of reading episodes that we do. So today we're going to talk about Cross of Iron first. Now, Cross of Iron is a movie that I saw many years ago, probably 2 decades ago, maybe, and had not seen in a while. So, like I said, this one's one of the rare ones that wasn't actually an influence on this book, but it's an important film. This is Sam Peckinpah's, I believe it's his only war film. If you don't count The Wild Bunch, which, but Sam Peckinpah, of course, was an infamous director, made really great movies in the 60s, 70s, and the 70s, and was known for making ultra violent, really intense films like Straw Dogs and The Wild Bunch and Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia, which is one of my favorites.
it is one of mine as well.
Yeah.
It's a good Fletch joke in there too.
Yeah.
Where Fletch orders lunch, he goes, and bring me the head of Alfredo Garcia.
Yeah, that's right. That's true. That is a good joke from Fletch. But Sam Peckinpah, let's starting with Mark. What's your experience with Peckinpah movies?
I've seen all the Peckinpah movies. I think I saw, as a matter of fact, I think the first movie I saw of his was Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia back in college. The Wild Bunch, Cross of Iron, Straw. I mean, I've seen most of his movies. There may be one or two out there that I haven't seen. Certainly, I've seen most, if not all of his, what I would consider to be mainstream movies, if you even want to call them mainstream, more well-known movies.
Yeah. Now Sam Peckinpah, Dino, what was your experience with Peckinpah?
Well, my first was I had a film class in college. I needed like a couple of electives, and I took something that interested me, and it was films from Inception, World War II, and then World War II to sort of the 80s, I think is where he cut it off. But he did a three film viewing of Peckinpah, which I'd never seen at the time, any of his movies. And one of them was Cross of Iron, one of them was Straw Dogs, and the other one was Wild Bunch. Wild Bunch stuck with me big time, and so much so that then I've subsequently since seen almost all of his movies, I think.
Yeah,
with Alfredo Garcia being one of the top echelon.
Now, Peckinpah is a filmmaker who could not exist today.
I don't know if that's true.
Oh, really? You think
not by studio backing?
Correct. No, he would be an independent filmaker, but
absolutely.
I think he could exist. I'm not sure he'd have the money to make some of the films. Like, I don't think he could make Cross of Iron just because not sure. Well, he got those from the Yugoslavian government. We'll get to it in a minute, but I think he could exist, very much so. I'm not sure he would be as renowned or well regarded as he is. He would certainly be shunned by a certain section of the community.
All right, we had a little bit of a rain delay here, a poop delay. I had to take care of a doggy, but on that regard, okay. So we were speaking of shitty things. Sam Peckinpah and his behavior on set. I personally believe that Sam Peckinpah would have a very hard time working today because of he was one of those directors, and we talked about this in the last episode in this series because Stroheim, the actor that played Rommel in Five Graves to Cairo, was known as this like insane dictatorial director, and that was just a thing that was more like kind of like normal in Hollywood back in the day. And Peckinpah, beyond just being like real intense and like yelling at people and being shitty to the crew and all that, He was a raging alcoholic. And one of the things that was noted on the Wikipedia page for this movie is that he was consuming 180 proof vodka bottles every day for and there were 2 to 3 weeks that were lost in filming just because he was so drunk he couldn't make it to the set.
So he had another habit too during this movie when because I was reading up on it a little bit. While he was editing, he took all the rushes from the movie and would edit all day long, and he would just snort cocaine and drink while he edited. And people just left him alone, and somehow he came out with a movie. Yeah. You know, I'm not saying he could again, I don't think he'd be a mainstream, but he would definitely have today, if he were working, he would have people who would watch his movies, no doubt. He would have a certain crew that would be deathly loyal to with a cult-like following, and he would have a set group of players like David Lynch who would be in all of his movies. That's what I would think Sam Peckinpah would be today, because people would he'd be this auteur to some, right? I mean, Peckinpah was pretty cool movies, but I'm not sure he was like a genius or anything.
Well, I just don't think I think it would be hard to get a crew that would just like want to put up with his bullshit.
Yeah, I
But
think in terms of the movies themselves, he could probably make them. It's working with him that would be
Yeah,
impossible in this day and
I could
age.
see that.
Yeah.
yeah,
No
that's
woman
the
would be able
thing.
to work with
And
him.
look, I like a Sam Peckinpah movie, the finished product. I do not like it's like one of those things where you don't want to think about the process that went into making it.
That particular sausage was made.
Yeah.
And then and a particular, of course, like one of the ones that's really hard to watch is Straw Dogs for obvious reasons. And like one of the things we know is about that movie is I'm pretty sure it's like well known that he bullied the heck out of Dustin Hoffman to kind of mirror what was happening in the movie, like during the filming. And I don't know that, like I said, I don't know how that would work these days. But
Well, and we'll talk about Cross of Iron, but everything I was reading up on it indicates that James Coburn, who granted is probably one of the few legitimate badasses of the time, really had a good time on the Peckinpah set and dealing with Peckinpah's director. So whatever.
yeah. And so he was Coburn was a last minute casting because Robert Shaw who Mark and I talked about in the Force 10 from Navarone episode, was originally cast in the role. Of course, one of the things that makes this movie hard for me now is that you have all these different nationalities playing Germans, and they just like do whatever accent, or voice they want.
Yeah.
You mean you couldn't believe that David Warner or James Mason were
right.
were Germans? David Warner with like this strict British accent, and Mason with his classic James Mason. Yeah. And they didn't care. You're right. They just didn't care. And that's fine. I don't mind that approach,
Right.
but
Yeah,
it's better than a fake German
It was
accent,
consistently inconsistent, which
Yes.
is wonderful. It worked out.
yeah, you just gotta have to let go of those things. when
Even
you're watching.
Maximilian Schell, who's Swiss, had his
Yes.
accent would kind of drift in and out. I don't
Yes.
know if he was going full German or trying to like tone it down so it would match his co-stars.
Yeah. Well, and we just covered Five Graves to Cairo, and that approach in 1943 was all German expat actors playing the Germans, and so everything was accurate. Austrian and Germans, and for the most part, was pretty accurate. So, it was doable if they wanted to. Much like Kelly's Heroes and Where Eagles Dare, this movie was filmed in Yugoslavia. So it's too bad we don't have Even on this episode to tell us which neighborhood he remembers from his childhood.
Was he able to do that last time?
He was able to do that a little bit with Kelly's Heroes.
Kelly's Heroes, yeah.
Yeah, he knew some of the filming locations, which was a big surprise for I think Dino and I. We're not expecting that, which was cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, quite a cast for we'll get to the cast in a bit. So this was originally a novel called The Willing Flesh that was apparently very popular in especially England. It had a long print run there. And the author of it was, and I had his name here somewhere. The guy who wrote it was actually a German soldier on the Eastern Front, and I thought I had in my notes what his name was, but I don't. But he was a soldier on the Eastern Front and was, from what I could tell, the novel, I haven't read it. Okay, I looked for it at the library but couldn't find it. The novel was considered kind of an anti-war novel, or the most anti-war novel from the perspective of somebody who was a survivor, who fought on the German side. And so again, I don't know if such a thing would be publishable today. I don't know how many people would be like, this guy fought for the Nazis, we're going to publish his novel, right?
Right.
And
His name is Willy Heinrich.
yeah, there we go. And so, but the point of the novel was, all the soldiers. That's the thing. The point of the novel was all the soldiers like coming to grips with the fact that, and the novel apparently was much more explicit about the idea of like the soldiers on the Eastern Front just realizing the war was lost, that Germany was going to lose, and that nothing good was coming out of what was happening. And it was about this character that James Coburn played, Steiner, kind of basically rebelling against his command hierarchy, which kind of sort of happens, but it's a loose adaptation, is what I can tell, having not read it but just read about it. So there is that. As far as the story goes, before we get into the casting, what do you guys think of the story itself, starting with Dino?
It's sort of immediately evoked Paths of Glory, insofar that you have this battle of wills between two military men over essentially nothing. It is a war of egos, basically. But I thought it was a really interesting notion of this sort of aristocratic officer really just craving a medal so that he can show off to his higher up, aristocratic, family and friends back home, and not really winning it on the field as Coburn's character does. So I always thought that sort of lowly motive was such a interesting way to linchpin I'm assuming in the book as well as a film.
Mark?
Yeah, I would see. I saw it a bit different. First of all, very anti-war. I saw it more from a perspective of, first of all, war is hell for everyone, right? That was I think part of it, and everything they demonstrated in it. And then I found it very interesting because you mentioned fighting for the Nazis in the book. It's very clear at one point, and I thought it was really cool how Peckinpah did it. It's very clear, and I think Steiner says it, and the captain Maximilian Schell says it. They both point out that, hey, they're with the Wehrmacht. They're with the German army. They're not Nazis. They're not part of the party. I've never been part of the party. And I think that's later on, it almost folds in on itself when, of course, is it the captain or the lieutenant? The lieutenant that Maximilian Schell is sort of blackmailing says, hey, I was following orders, which is sort of that myth of the clean Wehrmacht that has now been debunked, which is the German soldiers weren't really doing the Nazis' will, right? They were soldiers. They were fighting for their country. That since probably the 80s has really started being debunked, that whole myth of the clean Wehrmacht. But I thought it was interesting because you do have Steiner there, who is this character, and while he was rebelling, and he points out to James Mason and David Warner that, hey, I I hate you guys. Just because you're more progressive officers doesn't mean I hate you really any less. You know,
Yeah.
if there is a clean Wehrmacht, I would think, or a clean German soldier, Steiner kind of is the epitome of that, to the point where, you know, when he goes, when Shell goes, hey, I can't go home without the Iron Cross, and it's like James Coburn just has one. He's like, oh, I've got one, you know. I mean, because he just got it in the normalcy of doing his job as a soldier. I think that was a very, again, he's doing his job as a soldier, whereas so he's driven by trying to be a soldier, whereas the captain's driven by trying to be an egotistical aristocrat,
No,
as
status.
Dino said. Yeah, absolutely. But at the end, he almost, and I guess if you want to talk about the detailed plot, at the end that changes, right? The very end, the dynamic changes. I love the line that he says at the end, which is, you know, he says, I'll show you where the Iron Cross grows.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I thought it was a fantastic movie. It did get a little wild bunchish multiple times, but I did think it was a fantastic movie.
Well,
It was
and
a
I
hard
don't
movie
want
to
to go
watch
off,
at times, right?
yeah,
I mean, it was.
I don't want to go off too much of a tangent on this, but since you brought it up, I'm currently working the book I'm writing right now is on the unfinished work of Philip K. Dick, and one of the chapter I literally have been working on for the last 2 weeks is his planned and unfinished sequel to The Man in the High Castle, and the entire plot is revolves around a battle between the SS and the Wehrmacht. I always say it wrong. The German army, Wehrmacht, and how they hated each other.
They did.
Yeah, and they did, but ultimately the clean Wehrmacht idea is ridiculous because they
were complicit. They knew about everything that was
course,
happening with the SS. They did nothing to stop it, right? I mean, and at the end, again, that lieutenant who raises his hands, he goes, "Hey, I was just following orders," right? I mean, I thought that was a phenomenal scene. Of course, he was following orders to kill the German army members,
Sure.
but
Yeah.
you know,
knowing full well that
that's what it was.
Yeah.
Right.
So
yeah, it's a ridiculous idea that German army was somehow clean of what the SS was doing. That's the kind of thing you try to roll out at a war crimes tribunal. It's not, you know, and it's interesting to see
it's
that
not like
kind of
they used
dynamic
the army
play
to clean up some of the work that the SS did.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought Coburn, again, I thought Steiner was a fascinating character, and we can go and, you know, go through the plot, because I thought there were parts of the movie that the way that Coburn played him, I wasn't ever really sympathetic, because he knew what he was there for. He was sort of the guy that got things done, and he had the loyalty of his platoon, but that was largely because he was one of them. He didn't want to be a sergeant, right? When they made him a sergeant, he's like, I don't really care, you know.
And look, this series is promoting a book that hates Nazis, and the majority of the movies that we're watching, you know, gleefully hate Nazis. So it's an interesting dynamic to watch a movie and imagine Hollywood making a movie that's entirely Nazi characters. You know, it's entirely.
I mean, it was, but at the same time, if you look at the movie, it really isn't. It really still shows them as despicable people. I mean, James Mason and David Warner, when they're having that conversation, and Mason's like, we're losing the war. What are we going to do when the war's over? And I think David Warner goes, we're going to find the next, we'll get ready for the next war. Yeah, we'll prepare for the next one.
Great ending line, yeah.
And I was like, yeah, because that's how they're viewed, right? And yeah, they're not good guys. They're not good guys, even if, and Peckinpah doesn't portray them as good guys. I mean, look at the whole thing with the Russian females. I mean, that doesn't portray anyone in a good light for the most part, except maybe Steiner, and not even really Steiner.
Well, and then again, this is the idea of, again, like, studio would have a hard time making a movie like this, because, you know, who do you root for, right? And Hollywood always wants you to have like good guys, and so, you know, Peckinpah, well known.
Look at the Wild Bunch. No, you're not rooting for anyone in the Wild Bunch either.
Exactly. That's what I was gonna say. Yeah,
and that's how it
They're all
ends.
scumbags too.
Yeah, they're all scumbags too.
And Straw Dogs, nobody really looks great by the end. And same with Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia. Like Sam Peckinpah made movies about ugly, nasty people.
It's funny you say that, and I don't want to get off on a tangent. I'm reading a book right now called Night Work, which is about an author, or I'm sorry, a movie director who, again, was very pushed down underground because of, very much like Peckinpah, he didn't make good movies. He made nasty movies that people walk through hell to become angels, or to become the characters they become. And in many ways, that's what James Coburn does in this. It gets worse and worse for him, right? I mean, it doesn't.
Yeah.
At no point is he getting ready to go to Paris like some of the other characters are. He's like, this is my life.
Right. Yeah, and so it's just interesting because it does really present an issue if you're watching this movie, if you're looking for somebody to relate to, or somebody, and it's just not going to happen in this movie. That's not the movie you're watching. So
It's interesting you say that, though, because I was talking to a friend of mine who's a Marine, and I asked him before we started this whole podcast thing, even before Guns and Navarone, I said, what's your favorite war movie? And it's funny, I just asked another Marine who's another judge, although we didn't go into it, about a week ago because I knew about this podcast. I said, what's your favorite war movie? And they both said Cross of Iron. Now, I haven't gotten to why the judge said it, but I could tell you why the first Marine said it, because he said it's probably the most realistic portrayal of war up to Saving Private Ryan. That first scene of Saving Private Ryan. He said, yeah, war is just terrible. It's just a terror. That's what you prepare for. So
I've heard from veterans, or I believe a lot of people say Platoon too is one of those movies that's, and obviously Oliver Stone was a vet,
Sure.
and so I think his experience there is probably.
But in 1977, these movies didn't exist, right? You didn't
Right.
get, I mean, you had MASH, which was, about the Korean War, but really about Vietnam. But you didn't
Right.
have what would be a realistic, violent war movie. I mean, I'm amazed that Peckinpah was able to get real T-34 tanks to actually be in this movie. It was ridiculous. I'd love to know how the production actually worked.
What I read is he only had two,
Well, he did a good job with them.
and only one was functional. And he was able to just work around it with just editing and how he and setups of his camera. It was
He made it
and the
look
whole reason they filmed all the interiors were filmed in England, and the whole reason why they filmed in Yugoslavia was because they were told that they would get this equipment. And Peckinpah, like when he got there, they had significantly less than they were promised. So,
Wow, yeah. It
Man.
was what issues did you have with the film besides, of course, the portrayal of, and again, I don't necessarily think they glorified the Nazis or anything, but what issues did you have with the actual film and how it was put together? Did you have any, David?
Well, I thought it was a little slow. I think that it had some pacing issues and could have been a little bit shorter, because there were just some scenes that I thought were kind of, and look, at the same time, it's like Peckinpah. Some of the battle scenes are gratuitous and feel like they're going on for too long. But at the same time, if you're watching from a filmmaking perspective, it's really interesting to see how he's cut it together and how he's filming everything, because you're kind of paying attention to when does he use slow motion, when does he focus on this and that. And so that's fine and interesting from a Peckinpah perspective. But that being said, I feel like the story could have moved a little quicker to get to the point. There's a couple scenes where I feel like they belabored points, where they're talking about the same things over and over and over again a couple times. Now, that's not to say, I don't know. I'm just saying this is not a perfect movie. I liked it. Overall. I thought it was worth watching. I think that the overall anti-war message of it is pretty good. I'm not sure. I think it, and you pointed out, Mark, that it's not really a strict mission movie in the sense of
But in a
'cause
way it is, because he is trapped at one point behind enemy lines, right? He's got to
right.
pull back. Although
Yeah.
that is a really small part of the movie, and plot wise, I don't think it's particularly significant. Aside
Yeah.
from the fact when he gets back, his own side shoots him and tries to kill
Yeah.
everyone.
I mean, really, they
Uh,
had to pull together as a team in order to survive and make it
yeah,
back.
yeah,
Yeah. So and look, we did Army of Shadows last time, which was a Cloak and Dagger World War II OSS spy movie. And if you guys haven't seen it, you should. Um, uh, you know, we talked a lot in the last episode about how we feel like Andor was very influenced by Army of Shadows.
Oh,
And I
I must
think
see that, man.
yeah. Well, and the thing about Cross of Iron is that I think it's a very Peckinpah movie. It's taking this concept and Peckinpahing it, and I think he's a really interesting choice for director of this. And I'm actually kind of sorry he didn't make more Westerns. I mean, not more Westerns. He made plenty of Westerns, more
Yeah,
war movies.
more movies.
Sorry. He made plenty of Westerns. And I don't know if you guys know this, but when he died, he was working with Stephen King on making a movie called The Shotgunners that the Stephen King wrote the screenplay for, and then Peckinpah died, and bits and pieces of that became loosely became Desperation.
huh?
Yeah.
And but the Shotgunners screenplay is in the Stephen King papers in Maine. And I've talked to people who've read it, and they're King was writing it for Peckinpah basically, and so it's a little different than don't think you're going to see the skeleton of Desperation, because what I've been told is that when you read Shotgunners, you can't tell that it's you're like, okay, Desperation, I guess. But that's what King says.
What I found also interesting about just this movie from a film perspective is its DNA does, I mean, its DNA kind of is scattered throughout. It was even in Jojo Rabbit, when watching Jojo Rabbit, if you've ever seen Jojo Rabbit, I felt that a little bit there. I thought the way Peckinpah shot the beginning of it with the song, with the children's song, and how the movie ends with the children's song, but with very different images at the end of the children's song.
Yeah.
I thoroughly, again, I can't say I enjoyed it, but even though
the
there were
song,
times,
the children's song was an actual like Hitler
Mhm.
Youth song.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and they
when
sounded
I
so
turned
happy,
the movie
right?
on, I could tell you
Yeah.
Carrie was in the other room going, "What the hell are you watching?"
Well, the absurdity of the whole thing felt
Yeah,
like from the beginning, it was building up to that very end of
yes,
Coburn's just losing it in laughter of just the what the
exactly.
fuckness of it all.
Yeah, I mean, he's like, here's your gun, here's your helmet.
Yeah.
I'm going to
I
show
don't-
you how to be a hero.
Yeah.
You want to earn it? Let's go earn it. And then the guy can't even
He
reload
didn't
his own
reload
gun,
it.
right? What's interesting though is I've heard, and I haven't seen it, there is a sequel to this movie.
Is there?
Sort of
Sort of,
breakthrough.
not Breakthrough, not Peckinpah,
Yeah.
Peckinpah, but it does follow Steiner and the captain, which, by the way, I have no interest in seeing that story.
No.
I like the way
Yeah.
this ends, right? I like the look, you can want to be a hero, but you'll still never be a hero because you're still what you are.
I
Right.
Fascinating thing about this-
imagine that he died, that Stransky dies 30 seconds
Immediately.
after the
Yes.
the freeze frame at the end.
Yeah, with the Russian kid, because even the Russian kid is
Yeah.
kind of like shaking his head. I imagine, yeah, he's getting a bullet right in the head.
Yeah.
And Cobra
exactly.
just keep going on,
Laughing
whatever.
and shooting. Yeah.
Yeah. So some of the things about that sequel, Robert Shaw actually ended up playing the role in the sequel.
Really?
Yeah, and
Post Jaws.
it's critically panned. It's not considered good. I have no interest in seeing it either. Peckinpah was not involved. Almost some of the same producers were involved, but like none of the actors returned. Like, so, and what's interesting is, like, was Cross of Iron really like a movie that people were like dying for a sequel for? I don't know.
Well, how much money? It couldn't have made that much money, right?
No. and it had the misfortune of coming out in the summer of 77.
Mm.
It wasn't a feel-good movie, and it certainly was
No.
crushed by a couple other movies.
Yeah.
Crushed by one particular movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was crushed by Star Wars.
Star Wars.
Yeah, the entire Hollywood movie landscape was Star Wars, Star Wars, Star Wars.
Anti Peckinpah.
Yeah, and yeah, and so yeah, a lot of people felt like, it opened a couple weeks after Star Wars, which is, Star Wars took a couple weeks for the word of mouth to get around. So basically Star Wars was in its third week and it's still the number one movie in the country. And who's going to see Cross of Iron? Just really nobody. So that was a huge part of the release of it. So it was filmed in the spring of 76. Let's talk about a little bit about the cast. Great cast.
Oh, I thought the cast was
great.
phenomenal.
Yeah, James Coburn, Maximilian Schell, James Mason, David Warner. David Warner, who besides being in The Omen and Time After Time, played different alien characters in back-to-back Star Trek movies. So that's
he's one of my favorite. I mean, he is.
Yeah.
What's funny is these two movies that we're talking about tonight have two of my favorite actors of all time in them. One has each. David Warner, again besides The Omen, does voice work on Batman the Animated Series. He's
in the Wizard and Time Bandits.
Yeah, he's evil.
Evil.
He's evil in Time
he's
Bandits.
So good in Time Bandits.
He's great. I mean, David Warner, you feel like he just brings it no matter what. They're like, there's a British show called, is it Room? It's called Inside Number 9. I don't know if you've ever heard of it or seen it. It's by the guys, and it's a great anthology show. Every episode has something to do with a place with the address number 9. And David Warner in one episode plays a Puritan, not a witch hunter, but a Puritan mayor who brings in some witch hunters, and he's unbelievably hilarious. So any film that I can see David Warner in, I forgot that he was in this movie until I even started it.
Well, and you know what he's great in? The Man with Two Brains.
Oh yes, absolutely. He is.
He's great.
But he always brings it. Again, no matter how schlocky the movie is, he's like, all right, I'm here to do my job. Let's do it.
Right.
One of my favorite lines that he ever had in a movie is when he's looking at the stone wall in his his condominium castle, and he says, "It may look like solid rock, but it's thin as tissue paper."
He's also
yelling at the neighbors.
Is he like Billy Zane's like bodyguard or attaché in Titanic?
He wasn't Titanic.
Yeah, he was like his kind of bodyguard. He goes in running after DiCaprio at one point, shooting at him.
Yeah. Well, we could David Warner out all night,
all day.
We could.
James Mason. I always think of Salem's Lot.
Yes, absolutely.
Right.
Another sort of a guy with German ties, right? In Salem's Lot.
Yeah. And James Mason really brings some gravitas to this. Great stuff.
Lolita.
Yeah. So this was based on this movie was, by the way, based on a real battle. Much of the events, and like I said, that the guy who wrote it was a part of that, and he did serve as a technical advisor on the movie. The movie had a $4 million budget for 1976. Not bad. It was a English and an Anglo-German co-production, EMI Films, which, it's interesting that is an English production and Peckinpah being an American director or whatever, but he worked in England for Straw Dogs too, so he had experience working over there. There are theories that one of the reasons why he started working over there is all the bridges he burned here. Infamously, there were a lot of on-set battles for the Wild Bunch. But that could be, yeah.
I mean, this wasn't a joke of a movie. I mean, it was at Pinewood Studios. They they put some time and effort into it, and it shows. I mean, again, it's a quality movie, but you're right. I mean, how long? If I also remember, the shootings were delayed because he was drunk. I mean,
Yep.
I'm not sure how long, if you're the German backers, and maybe that's why he's not coming back for the sequel, because I think the Germans backed the sequel too. Maybe they're
Yeah.
just like, yeah, we can do it without him this time.
Well, I read rumors about like Coburn and different actors being so frustrated that they were like going and like throwing water in Peckinpah's face, and and they filmed a few scenes without him. And probably this was in England and when they were doing all the studio stuff, so maybe some of the scenes with dialogue and stuff like that. But
Let's
again,
talk about the dialogue. This is one of those movies I had to turn the subtitles on because it was scrappy. The sound wasn't great, and I had a pretty good copy of it. I mean, I had a digital copy of it, remastered, I think, as a matter of fact. But I think that was very Peckinpah-ish, right? The style of just sort of picking up the sound wherever he could. I had to go back multiple times before I turned the subtitles on just to hear what some of the characters had actually said. Because again, Coburn was trying to do a German accent, and even though he didn't have a lot of lines in the movie, I thought they were important enough to hear what he was saying.
Well, I had a funny experience with the sound because I was watching it late and I was trying not to annoy my partner here. And so every time there was a dialogue scene, I had to turn it up. And then as soon as there was a massive explosion, I had to like turn it back down because not only were there a lot of explosions in this movie, but they would happen just out of nowhere. And then they were extremely loud in the way that they filmed them and put them in the movies. So I was like, I had to be quick on the volume button.
I listen to it with headphones on. I generally do anyway. And Mark's right. There were the continuity in terms of recording, not just dialogue, but sound effects varied a lot.
Yeah.
So there were points where I'd have to like scrub back to make sure I heard what I thought they said correctly. So I don't know if that was part of Peckinpah's crew or the English crew or just a mishmash
I
of
think it was probably him. I mean, like I said, it's the same
doing
sort of
cocaine and drinking while he was mixing.
yeah. I mean, it's the same sort of thing that you see in the Wild Bunch, right? You see, he liked to just capture films. It's why he antagonized Dustin Hoffman. He wanted a real reaction out of people, and you're right, probably wouldn't go well today. But so yeah, make a loud noise. Let's see how this guy reacts. So I think it was very let's pick up the sound around us. It's interesting because while there are big names in this movie, Coburn's platoon largely unknowns, and I think, I mean, there probably were several Germans in there. But I thought they did a fantastic job too. I really do. I got the feeling that these guys were really willing to die for this corporal who then becomes a sergeant. Only because of him, though, not because of the German cause, right?
Right. Well, yeah. And the only other like really interesting thing about the shooting of this that I have is that I had to improvise parts of the ending because they were so behind on schedule because of Peckinpah's drinking that on July 6th, so they started in March. So on like July 6th, like the producers were just like, nope, you have to finish this and you have only this amount of time. And they basically told Peckinpah, you don't have time to do your original plans. We just don't have it. We had the budget. You drank it away, buddy. So you got to figure it out. And so Peckinpah had to improvise parts of the filming of it. So it's funny because we think of Peckinpah as this great auteur director or whatever, but he's having to like make up for days and things like that. And it's just real funny to think about. Like, yeah, I don't think that yeah, I honestly don't think that shit would fly these
Well, I
days.
think the studio would probably take, unless it was a true independent film, I think the studio probably would have pulled him off of it at some point, right?
Yeah, as an
Although
independent, he
these,
never would have finished it if he had
yeah,
that
they would
big
have
of a
gone, hey,
drinking or
look,
drug
yeah.
problem.
Yeah.
I
Well, and just
will
look at
say,
the. Did you guys see Carnahan's Cop Shop last year? It's surprisingly
Mhm.
good. Okay, yeah,
No.
you should see Cop Shop. But he famously, like Carnahan, I have great respect for Carnahan as a director, but he is known for getting in these insane battles. That's why he went from making A-list Hollywood movies like the A-Team, The Gray, whatever, and now he's doing mostly in like, and he's doing good stuff, by the way. Boss Level a couple of years ago was great. It's very much like everything everywhere all at once, but was made before it. And but Carnahan made this movie a couple of years ago called Cop Shop, and I think it's only on Peacock, but he Cop Shop, the first 2/3 of the movie is really, really good. It's underrated, good action movie. And then it has this weird ending that just totally kind of sucks the life out of the movie. And what happened was is the studio just took the movie away from him and had somebody film this other ending. And he was furious, of course. But a lot of the same things that we're talking about with Peckinpah, for Carnahan, it's just him fighting with the studio and saying like, no, I'm not doing what you're telling me. He's not getting drunk on the set or anything, but he's having these fights, and the studio, just because they paid the money, they just took the movie away and filmed their own ending for it. And I don't think that kind of stuff happened back then quite as much, but I could be wrong. But it's interesting to think about, like, Peckinpah somehow got his, even though he was like blitzed on cocaine, like he got the edit that he wanted out of
yeah,
this.
I mean, it is interesting because maybe if Peckinpah's movies were more successful, he'd be. I mean, look, we hear about stories with directors today. You hear about David O. Russell sometimes, but at the same time, he'll make a movie that just goes totally off the chart. So, hey, when he gets a little crazy with I Heart Huckabees and Lily Tomlin goes off on him because she doesn't like him, I mean, you don't worry about it because he makes Silver Linings Playbook at the same time, right?
Yeah. Or
That's
Three
not how
Kings.
that's not how Peckinpah was. Peckinpah was Dirty Dozen, Straw Dogs, Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia, and Cross of Iron, and that's just
Well, he didn't
these
make
are the
Dirty
movies,
Dozen, but
or not Dirty Dozen.
No.
What I was just gonna say, not Dirty Dozen, the Wild Bunch.
yeah.
But I mean, yeah, he makes these movies and they're his. It's unmistakably a Peckinpah movie. I thought it was very good. I'm not sure I'm lining up to see it again, nor do I think it was my favorite war movie. It would have been interesting to watch this and then watch All Quiet on the Western Front and pair those two together as war movies. Either the new one, which I have not seen, or the old one.
I haven't seen the new one. I need to.
Yeah.
Eventually. Let's try to move on to Dirty Dozen. Any other things, starting with Dino, that you have to say about Cross of Iron?
I wish I'd seen it again right after, because I really thought it surprised me seeing it again for the first time in like over 20 years how much I missed the first time. And that's just being, older and understanding better the notion of the anti-war film. I really liked it. I don't think it was his best in terms of violence choreography. I know it's a bit of a nitpick. It felt sometimes a little lost and all over the map, and which I guess part of it was the chaos of war that helped, that in which that
Mountains
worked.
of cocaine while editing.
Mountains of cocaine while editing. Yeah, it was not ballet or Wild Bunch. You knew everything that was happening where everyone was. This was a mess. But
so much cocaine, he died 5 years later.
Too young. But I love the two performances at the center of it, and they're a little dual. So that will stay with me. And Stransky's horrible like blackmail of the two officers was like
That was hard to watch.
Hard to watch. Yeah.
When he's like, you do enjoy the company of men, right?
Men, right.
A real men.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was hard to watch.
Yeah. Yeah, like I don't know how you would direct that scene today.
Well, yeah, that was an intense scene, and I think overall Cross of Iron, it's not top tier Peckinpah. Although he made a couple weird westerns that I know the Ballad of Cable Hogue is supposedly was his favorite movie, and I don't know if you've ever seen that, but that is a boring western. And a lot of people, I'm pretty sure it's well known that was like one of his favorites, but it's a rough Charlton Heston movie.
Wow.
But yeah, overall, I'm kind of like 3 stars on Cross of Iron, positive 3 stars, but still, I think
I might give it a little bit more, only because I do like what he did with how he wraps up the concept of the German soldier versus the SS, and I do like his little hint at a time when that whole myth of the clean German soldier still existed. How he sort of points the finger where again the lieutenant's like, hey, I was just following. He literally, I think, says, I was just following orders. I had nothing to do with this. And I thought that was huge.
Yeah.
I thought that was a huge moment in the movie. And the guy gets killed for it. Steiner goes ahead and kills him for it. Because it wasn't out of principle, right? That's not what a real soldier would say. A real soldier would probably just own up to it in a way. And Steiner's in whatever code that Steiner had himself, right?
Mhm.
So, but I would give it a little bit more, but I definitely would agree with you. Not top tier Peckinpah. To me, not really at the top of the heap as far as war movies.
Yeah, agreed.
But
Yeah.
good. But worth the watch, definitely.
Sure.
Yeah, I'd still put it over Kelly's Heroes, which we watched for the series, but
well, that was a goofy movie. I
Yeah,
mean,
that
I
was
didn't watch for the series, but I remember
totally
watching it. It was
different.
just a goofy movie.
Yeah, it was meant to be goofy. It was meant to be goofy.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
All right, so The Dirty Dozen. Now this is an ultimate classic in the World War II mission. This might be, this is the one that, as far as every time I pitch a project as being like, for my novel Goddamn Killing Machines, I pitched it as The Dirty Dozen in the 24th century, and like I pitched Last Night to Kill Nazis as Dirty Dozen with a vampire a couple times, even though Where Eagles Dare is Where Eagles Dare is closer, but Dirty Dozen is more well known. So that's why you do that. So The Dirty Dozen is a MGM classic from the late 60s. It is one of the top grossing movies of 1967. It was a best-selling novel in 1965, but MGM bought the rights to do the film before it was even out, from the word of mouth from the publisher. So E.M. Nathanson sold the rights to this, for the film rights to this before it was even out. That still happens every once in a while today. Paul Tremblay, for example, sold the rights to Cabin at the End of the World before it was out. So sometimes the word of mouth just gets out there. And it was based on there's theories as to what inspired E.M. Nathanson. There was supposedly this 101st Airborne Division, like legendary demolition squad in World War II that was called the Filthy 13, because supposedly they were like super smelly and didn't like shave or whatever. And then also, which for soldiers was a thing, but of course, I think once you get out in the war zone, I think there was probably more than a few people that weren't shaving, but whatever. And there's also an infamous story about Roosevelt offering 44 prisoners with life sentences the chance to go fight in the war. And we are now seeing Russia do the same thing in the Ukraine. So unfortunately, this is a thing that happens, prisoners being offered the chance to go to war. So building a movie about a bunch of convicted murderers and stuff, that's the plot of The Dirty Dozen, is a group of soldiers who were convicted of various crimes are given a chance, and a OSS officer played by Lee Marvin, who was a veteran himself, is given the job of training them and taking them on a mission that coincides with the D-Day invasion to kill a whole bunch of Nazis and cause disruptions behind enemy lines. Well, the D-Day invasion happens. That's the plot. Mark, when was the first time you saw The Dirty Dozen?
I saw The Dirty Dozen probably when I was 10 or 11, maybe. And it's when I think of war movies, and look, it's not a realistic war movie because I think it suffers almost from, I don't even think it suffers, but it is almost the template of other war movies you see, including Full Metal Jacket, where it's really almost two movies, right?
Yeah.
The acts are definitely different. That last act of The Dirty Dozen is definitely different from the first part of the movie because there's the training and there's recruitment, then training, then mission. I saw it probably when I was 10. I had a blast with it then, and I had a blast with it last week when I watched it probably for, I don't know, the 30th time. It's just, I don't know why. I mean, I could point to one reason why I love it so much, and that is, as I mentioned, one of my favorite actors is in it, which is John Cassavetes. He as Franco makes that movie. It's not Lee Marvin for me. It's not Donald Sutherland. It's not Jim Brown. It's Cassavetes, who again is probably one
you
of
don't even mention Bronson.
Bronson, right?
No, because John as Franco, he's just so good. He's why I want to watch that movie. I'm rooting for that guy to make it, and I think he might be the last one that doesn't make it. But so good. I like Charles Bronson too. I do. But Cassavetes in almost Rosemary's Baby and almost every film I've ever seen with him, he knocks it out of the park, and he does it in this one too. But he does it in a way that just makes me happy. And the director himself. Yeah.
Dino, when did you first see it?
Probably the same age. My dad was wedded to the television, I think more than my mom sometimes, and loved war movies and loved Westerns. And he had me come sit with him and I'd watch, everything. And this was one of them. And I've probably seen it a couple of dozen times in my life. And it never ceases to surprise me how little of the film is actually dedicated to the mission itself.
Correct.
Yeah, well, we'll get to that.
The problem. That's the problem I had with it. We'll talk about that.
Exactly.
It surprises me.
And I don't
every
care.
time.
By the way, I don't care.
Neither do I.
I don't care because it
always catches me off guard.
It's so great. And to me, the movie is so great. It's so entertaining.
Yeah.
Which is silly to say about a war movie because I don't really consider. I mean, it is a war movie, but dude, when they go in there and Donald Sutherland's pretending to be the general, still makes me just crack up every single time.
Donald Sutherland, who's essentially playing the same role he did in Kelly's Hero.
Yes, this quiet, meek, kind of goofy guy, right? Crazy, a little crazier, kind of spacey. Yeah. But when he goes in there and they have him pretend to be the general, it just blows me away. It's hilarious.
Yeah.
So my experience, I have a very strong memory of the first time I watched The Dirty Dozen on ABC Sunday Night Movie when I was very, very young, watching it with my dad and my mom sitting there reading probably a romance novel, like sitting at the, not watching the movie at all, not caring about it. But I remember watching it with my dad on ABC Sunday Night Movie. And because I remember, because my dad being my dad and being a history nerd and all that, and I remember talking to him a lot about World War II during the commercials on the ABC Sunday Night Movie. And boy, it must have been really long. on ABC Sunday Night Movie.
It was probably like at least 3 hours long on the
It was
Sunday
3.5
Night Movie,
hours,
right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
What's funny is, as amusing as the movie is, and is as happy and humorous as I think it is in a way, it does not start off humorous at all. That I forget how that opening scene really is pretty morbid, right?
Yeah,
Where
let's open
where
up
Lee
with an
Marvin goes in and
execution.
they make him watch the execution,
Yeah.
and you're like, oh.
Yeah, I totally forgot about that scene until watching it again, and then I was like,
But it sets up the stakes for all of them.
It does.
Yeah.
It does.
Essentially,
Lee
yeah.
Marvin knows it's not a joke at that point.
Yeah.
And when I first saw it, I was like, oh, he's not really, this is the Dirty Dozen. These are about prisoners. I knew that when I watched it when I was a kid. It's like, he's not really dead. That's just how they're going to make it look. And no, that guy's really dead.
Yeah.
And he's like begging for his life at the end, right?
Yeah. Well, and so, yeah, so the Dirty Dozen, huge movie. The cast in this is crazy. So let's go through the cast a little bit because it's just the supporting cast: Ernest Borgnine, Charles Bronson, Jim Brown, John Cassavetes, Richard Jekyll, George Kennedy, Telly Savalas, Donald Sutherland, Clint Walker, and Robert Webber. I mean, this is quite a cast. In some in really minor roles, like George Kennedy and Ernest Borgnine I think are really great in small roles.
Mhm.
And one thing that's really interesting too is Jim Brown was still active in the NFL, and he actually retired from the NFL to finish filming because the filming went long and he was supposed to head back to training camp, and the Browns were pissed and they were like, you have to come back to training camp. And he was like, okay, I retire. Because he was excited. He really liked because as an African-American, you don't usually get roles of characters that you could really believe in. And one thing that's interesting too is Jack Palance was offered the role of Maggot. But because
that would have been interesting.
Right.
That would have been scarier.
But
I don't know. Telly Savalas really gives me a creep factor in that role every time I see it.
Creepy, but over the top creepy. Like he's creeping it out to be creepy. Whereas I think Palance would have been more subtle in his creepiness.
Well, Palance wouldn't even consider the role because he thought he said it was disgusting, and he
really,
yeah.
I don't know. What's the movie with Palance? Is it Palance? Oh, what is it? Where the escaped lunatics? Is it Alone in the Dark? That was a pretty creepy movie that Palance was in. I don't know. It was pretty disgusting. Same kind of thing.
Palance did a lot of. This is the '60s, and by the '80s, Palance was cashing whatever.
Was looking
he
for
was cashing
work.
a lot of checks by that point. But at the
yeah,
time,
I thought Telly Savalas. At first you're thinking, oh, he's kind of this religious nut, but that's clearly not it.
No,
he's got a lot of other problems going on.
He happily
he's an absolute
psychotic.
Yeah.
Religion, but yeah, he was a psychopath.
Yeah. And that's one of the scenes that worked for me this time that I never got before was, when he's on and look, the scene, there's a lot wrong with the scene, but when he's in the watchtower, like him being up there, that is super creepy.
Mm-hmm.
And really something from a performance angle, Telly Savalas is really like bringing it. And obviously Telly Savalas was like, sure, I'll play a maniac, racist, misogynist,
psychosexual guy, right? I mean, that was the thing. Just seeing the woman pushed him over the edge to start killing his own people almost at the end, right? It was ridiculous.
Yeah.
But he did a really good job of it. Jack Palance would have been a totally different animal with it.
Yeah.
I kind of would have liked to have seen it.
I think we're better off that Palance said no.
Yeah.
But
Savalas fit the tone better.
If I'm not mistaken, by the way, and I'm looking it up right now, David, as we talk, when you mentioned Jim Brown retiring, just to go back to that for a second, yeah, I was right. That was no joke because at that time, he was the leading rusher in the NFL. I mean, it wasn't like he was on his way down. He was the man.
Yeah.
So
I do think he ended up playing again, but like I think he was calling bullshit on the team, just saying like, fine, then I'm doing this. And
No, he
then
said the owner of the team, Art Modell, it says here, said that he would never. He's the one that made the ultimatum, and he said he would never do that today. He said it
yeah,
was not fair for him to make that call. Well, Art Modell's dead now, but I think he's
yeah,
dead. But he wouldn't have made that call today, right?
yeah, yeah. Well, and I think it was Jim Brown. Jim Brown was a politically, he was in that crew of African American ballers then that were very political. Like, so I'm sure he was just like, fine, fuck you. I'm taking my control back.
Yeah, I mean, and
So he was friends with Malcolm X and all that,
Mhm.
and
I love Jim Brown. I love Jim Brown, and I thought the fact that he was in this movie, I guarantee you, it was very important to him, right? I
yeah,
mean,
Mhm.
yeah.
anyone can play football. Not every black actor can get on the screen in what will be a blockbuster, right? I
Yeah,
mean, it was pretty well known with this group of people, this was going to be a blockbuster.
right. And he
To say
knew he
nothing of
could.
having the African American experience of World War II portrayed at all in movies as at that time, especially.
And
Yeah,
and out of all of these characters, he actually comes off as the most heroic throughout the whole movie, right?
Mhm.
He even at the beginning, he's not this detestable criminal. And at the end, you could argue in the raid, he does the most important part of
yeah,
Mhm.
and
of it.
yeah, and he was convicted of murder, but that's because they were good. They were
Self-defense.
Yep.
self-defense,
Yeah.
and they were gonna, and the racists were gonna lynch him,
Yep.
basically.
Yeah, we're
Yeah,
gonna castrate him.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so he had him and Bronson had the most like kind of,
Sympathetic, I guess, if you want to call
yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
whatever you want
Bronson's
to
was a
call it.
little, yeah, yeah. I mean, and then Lee Marvin had that line for Bronson's character where he's like, I don't have a problem that you shot him. I just have a problem that
Let
you
someone
let them
see
see you
you
do it.
do it.
And because was it the guy was running away with the meds when the soldiers were
Yeah.
dying?
Yeah.
And was the idea. Charles Bronson, speaking of, by the way, this is hilarious because at the time, Bronson's comments on the movie was, and you're gonna laugh when you hear this, that Charles Bronson would say this, but at the time, Bronson did not like the movie that much because he thought it was too violent.
Yeah, I could see that at the time,
Mhm.
right? At that point, he was known for westerns. I'm trying to remember, was Once a Time in the West before, or it would have been after this,
It would have
I
been
think.
after this, and
After.
he is
Yeah, yeah.
incredible in that movie. And
Yeah.
and I say it's hilarious because, of course, he would go on to make 3 Death Wish
Death Wish.
sequels, and the
Death
Death Wish
Wishes, 10
sequels.
to Midnight, all of
Yeah.
those sort of revenge, violent, urban
Right.
films, right?
He's Liam
Yeah,
Neeson
he
before Liam
eventually,
Neeson.
yeah, but at that point, Bronson was just cashing checks,
Mhm.
Yeah.
and
I mean, Bronson was legit. He was a legit
Yeah.
tough guy. Lee Marvin was a legit tough guy.
well, no,
It
there's a
was,
comment on that where, because the cast includes a bunch of veterans from World War II. Lee Marvin, Robert Ryan were all in the Marine Corps. Telly Savalas and George Kennedy were in the Army. Bronson was in the Air Force, and Ernest Borgnine was in the Navy. Clint Walker was a Merchant Marine. But there's a really funny quote. George Kennedy said they were in a press conference, and George Kennedy said, it took me 2 years to make private first class. Lee Marvin said, I didn't even make that in the Marines. And Borgnine said, I was beneath notice in the Navy. And then Borgnine said, for punks, we're doing all right. And then Marvin said, I wonder how the generals are doing now. Which is
yeah.
kind of funny.
Nice.
I thought the recruitment that I think we should talk about the 3 acts of this movie because they
Well,
are.
before we do that, one thing real quick. Robert Aldridge, who directed the movie, because we talked a lot about Peckinpah, Aldridge was a big time studio director, directed a lot of big time movies, and like used his money from this to start his own studio. Okay. And made some pretty serious movies over the years.
Some
He
good
made
genre movies.
Mhm.
A couple great horror movies.
Yeah, I got to pull up his list.
Did
here.
I think Whatever Happened to Baby Jane and Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte were both of his, if I'm not
Yeah.
mistaken. And then didn't he also do The Longest Yard? I
Yep,
think he
The
did
Longest
that
Yard.
too.
Yeah. Hmm.
I think he did
Yeah,
that too, which was another great sort of prisoner
Group
group movie.
movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
he did a really an anti-war movie that I have never seen, but I've heard about, called Twilight's Last Gleaming. That's on my list of movies that I want to see. He made Emperor of the North, which was a super weird movie with Lee Marvin. I don't know if you've ever
Great
seen
movie.
that.
Ernest Borgnine, Lee Marvin as hobo. Lee Marvin's like a hobo.
Right.
I have that DVD. I've only seen it like once or twice. It is weird, but it is cool. And Ernest Borgnine is this legendary, like, I don't know, railroad. He works for the railroad, and his job is basically to get rid of hobos.
Right.
It's like a 2.5 hour movie. It's if I remember correctly, it is weird, but I didn't realize he made that.
Yeah, and I know Guillermo del Toro loves that movie and has talked about it a bunch.
It's super weird, but it is good to watch.
But another Robert Aldrich movie I really want to see is he made a Western called Ilzana's Raid, that's about an Apache war party, and it's supposed to be one of the most like insanely like just over crazy westerns, and I've never seen it. And that was one of the movies that he took his money from Dirty Dozen to start his own studio. That was one of the movies that he like put a lot of money into that movie, or like that was one of his dream projects when he took the Dirty Dozen money, and tried to put it to use. So but yeah, hold on, let me pull up my notes.
Well, he does a couple other movies that are very much like the Dirty. I know he did one with Michael Caine that I've seen once or twice. I don't even remember the name of it, but it's very Dirty Dozen-esque. I mean, he definitely had it's almost like who did Guns of Navarone? You know how the James Bond movies were plotted out almost the same way, or Force 10 from Navarone. Aldrich had a way of making movies.
Yeah.
Towards the end. The beginning was a little bit different. He did some noir movies and stuff, but he definitely had a thing he liked to do. He liked those ensemble movies, definitely.
Yeah, he and Lee Marvin made a World War II movie in the 50s called Attack, that I want to see. I have not seen it, but it's on my list. So let's see. So The Dirty Dozen was also filmed in England. Unlike Across Iron and Kelly's Heroes, all of it was filmed in England, even the countryside scenes and the outside. So there was also a lot of boozing going on the set of this movie. John Wayne was the original choice for Reisman, of course. They tried to get John Wayne. He supposedly did not like that Reisman was and I don't remember this, but he's objected to Reisman like committing adultery or cheating on his wife or something in the war theater, but I don't remember that's ever happening. I guess in the original script there was he had a mistress in England, I guess is what I'm reading here. But I think Lee Marvin's great in this movie, so I think he definitely would have been better than John Wayne, so I'm glad. Yeah.
I think John Wayne would have overshadowed the concept of military authority. I think Lee Marvin seems military enough that he's willing to take orders. Even though he can question those orders, he still takes the orders.
Yeah.
He knew going in it was suicide. I think the John Wayne persona that he had been as an actor would have trumped that. People wouldn't have believed that he is that guy who would do that.
Marvin's world weariness was just natural.
Yeah. And so one thing that's really interesting about Reisman as a character and what makes him an interesting character in this setting is that, and one thing that I think gets lost on some people, is that he's an OSS agent. and he's, technically like on loan from the army to the OSS. So he is not, that's what a lot of the tension between all like the military brass and Lee Marvin is, that there was a lot of tension between the army soldiers who got taken away to the spy services, and that I thought was a neat little part of that part of the story. So yeah, and so now we can get into the 3-act structure, because here's the thing. I will say this. Watching it this time, I felt the length a little bit, and I felt like there definitely could have trimmed some of the training like along the way. We didn't necessarily, like, I'll take for example the scene with the guy who can't climb the rope and he shoots the bottom of the, like, it's I get it. And if you were doing a TV series or a mini series based on the Dirty Dozen, you could do lots of that stuff.
Right.
But in the movie, I was just kind of like, let's get to the point. And I understand why a lot of the scenes are there, but I just feel like a lot of it could have been cut for time. And it's possible that when they did it on the ABC movie night, they probably did cut scenes. So,
Yeah, I think that the important scenes, they could have cut some of those scenes. I think it would have highlighted the important scenes. For example, the not shaving, not bathing scene, right? Where they kind of come together as a group. Those are the important scenes. The scene with Donald Sutherland is when they go to do the parachute exercise. That's an important scene. The training or the war games, important scenes. But you're right. Climbing a rope, watching them do push-ups, unimportant.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, we got what's good about these characters were they were, and the actors, they were such big personalities. During the introduction, you got the flavor of the character. You didn't need that extra stuff. You knew how Telly Savalas, how Maggot was. You knew how Cassavetes' character was. You knew how Jim Brown's character. You knew how Charles Bronson's character was. You didn't need to see more development of that in the second act. What you needed to see is them come together as a group, and they do that very well. But I think you could have still trimmed out the other stuff, and it would have been just as effective.
Yeah. So Dino, how did you feel about the 3 acts?
I completely agree with trimming it or consolidating. I think a lot of that bonding could have happened also during like the war game part, which is like the second act, where they really come together and work as a unit. Although I will say I did see it the night after I saw Cross of Iron, and Dirty Dozen did feel like it flew by compared to Cross of Iron. And I think
Right.
it's because I was with Cross of Iron, I was actually more immersed in the dialogue scenes because I felt they had a little more weight. And the Dirty Dozen, I'd seen it plenty of times, so I was familiar with the timing and the feel of it. But now having seen, just being more immersed in film and stuff, you start to see those extraneous scenes or where things could have been cut back a bit or consolidated or removed altogether. It makes me think when you were saying about Mark about the ABC, night version of this, they could have also, depending on where it fell time-wise, added some scenes to make the 3.5 hour.
They probably did. They often filmed, right, David? They often filmed extra scenes. If you watch the TV version of Superman, Richard Donner filmed the extra scenes that you don't see when you watch it on the movie. He had scenes where he was going underground, and Star Trek did it too, right?
They added, for the TV. Yeah. Well, that's true. Now, so one of the things,
by the way, comparing the two movies, though, as Dino was saying, because he watched them back to back, I watched them in reverse. And in watching them in reverse, this movie is, to me, first of all, it is a classic movie. But if you watch this and then watch Cross of Iron, you realize how much of a popcorn movie this is. It is not a serious movie.
It still felt that way watching it the other way.
Yeah, either way, comparing the two, you couldn't have gotten too dynamically. I mean, you could have by putting like Platoon with something like this.
Sure.
I mean, I think like if you look at Inglourious Basterds, Tarantino's Inglourious Basterds, I think he has a good mix of both seriousness and humor. This one, I think, is just. Don't get me wrong. I think at the time they thought they were making a serious war movie, just like Guns of Navarone, but it doesn't come off that way in retrospect, right?
Well, one of the things about the Dirty Dozen too is it's like if you show Flash Gordon to people who've watched a lifetime of Star Wars, they'll
perfect. Yeah.
you know, they'll say like they'll suddenly realize like, oh, this all came, you know, or if you show like Hidden Fortress, Kurosawa, you'll like, you'll be like, oh my God, there's R2D2
Oh,
and
there's the
C3PO.
line.
Yeah. And you can see it. And I think a lot of people, if they watch Dirty Dozen now, they're going to see all these movies with the mission, with the characters who have to go, you know, for every haunted house book, movie, whatever, you have to have a reason why the person will stay in the house, even though it's crazy. And for these mission movies, a lot of times you have to have the reason why someone's motivated to do this suicide mission, even though
I don't know. Good.
Yeah.
And I know we're not talking about Inglourious Bastards, but I like their motivation, which I have a feeling is very much like The Last Night to Kill Nazis, which is we just want to kill Nazis, right?
Yeah.
The Bear Jew, when he walks out of there in that movie, yeah, it's his motivation.
The Nazis give you all the motivation you need.
Yes, this one was, hey, you're gonna get, because which character is it who's like, I don't even want your war, I don't even want to be here, but it's Franco, I think. He's like, just go pound sand, but in the end, he's like, okay, you'll save me, really? Okay, then I'll go do this.
Right.
He was particularly selfish. The 3-act structure, I love the War Games part too. I like Borgnine's face when he realizes what's going on. Right, he's trying to hold back a laugh.
Right.
Borgnine also had a great improv when they're talking, and I read that it was an improvisation, which is when they're talking about the party, and you know, one of the generals says something about like, you know, basically what happened at the party, and then he like coughs up part of his drink. That was an improvisation that took everyone by surprise, you know, that he just did that. So, and Borgnine was in a movie that, by the way, Escape from New York, which plays with this whole, like, you know, you got to go on the mission.
It's in my top 5 movies of all time.
Love
Cabby. Spectacular.
So,
Borgnine's another guy who cashed checks at the end of his career, but always enjoyable to watch.
That grin.
Yeah, he was great. George Kennedy was great as the observer.
Well, it had to be he had to be in it if it was an ensemble movie, right?
Of course.
George Kennedy just had to be there.
Yeah. And I thought he was really, in the fact that he was the guy that kind of rooted for him the whole time was kind of the fun thing. And, you know, he really wanted to see them win. So, you know, the fact that when they kicked him off the truck because he would have given away what they were doing, and then he comes running back, that was funny. And as far as the final mission goes, too, when they go to the chateau, it's interesting because it is so little of the movie, but you have the I thought it's interesting too, because when they get all the Nazis trapped in there, and I was like, man, they are really taking their time pouring the gas and doing all that. I was like, why are they waiting? And then I realized it's because they're waiting for the other attack force to get there. So, you know, whatever. Anyways, the mission was interesting. It was well done, but it could have been more of the story, I guess. And
it was really short. The mission was short. I mean, it was going back to Cross of Iron. These were Captain Stransky's, right? They were all these aristocratic, having a ball, let's have a party, there's champagne. So not only do you not like them because they're Nazis, although I think they were portrayed as, again, the German army instead of Nazis. I think they were Nazis in this. I think they had Nazi
I think in the chateau they
had armbands, right? I'm trying to remember. But either way, you just want to see them get it because they're just pretentious assholes too, right?
Yeah.
You're like, look, there's a war going on, and these guys are literally having a ball. Not like, I mean, they're having a ball. There's music, there's dancing, they're having a ball.
You almost ignore the fact that they're actually committing a war crime.
Yes.
Killing all the civilian women that were there.
Yeah, they're just loading the women in there. They're loading everyone, pouring gas down there.
Grenades and gas.
Yeah. Yeah, you do kind of forget about that, which is part of one of the reasons why Charles Bronson, the future actor of the Death Wish franchise, was so offended. Boy, if Charles Bronson then had seen Death Wish 3, he'd probably be pretty horrified. But
Checks, man, checks.
yeah. All right. So just to kind of start wrapping things up a little bit, but
Before we do that, let's talk about the very last part. I'm sorry to interrupt, Dave, but this movie really, and I mentioned this in a text, the part that bothered me most of any of it is the abrupt ending. It's literally Lee Marvin, Charles Bronson in the hospital, and it's like, all right, we're done. That's it. There's no resolution to what happened. They don't really talk about it. It's like, we're done.
I actually think that's not as bad as some movies in that era where they just have like they'd just do a freeze frame on like the last explosion would happen, then they'd have a freeze frame, and then it would say the end.
It's not
so
Butch
trust
Cassidy.
me, there's way worse in that era.
Butch Cassidy or what is it? The Police Squad, where they're holding coffee and pouring coffee out, right? From Police Squad. Yeah, but I mean, the point of the movie is
exactly right.
Yeah, exactly. These strangers came together. These criminals came together, and aside from Telly Savalas, they did form this brotherhood. And like, he's like, remove his body. We're taking him out. They were a group. They were a true group at the end. And there's no mention of that. I mean, Charles Bronson kind of gives a glance over about how, this kind of sucks because look, all of our friends are dead, but it's only a split second. And then there's no acknowledgement of all the sacrifices made by everyone.
And well, again, there was 4 direct to TV sequels in the 80s that were,
but it was much later in the 80s, right? Like 87. I never saw them.
They were post Delta Force. Lee Marvin.
Was Cannon involved? Was Cannon Group involved? I bet you they were.
They might have been.
Or Goal and Globus, one of the two, right? They're the ones who made all those movies.
Now there's a movie, Delta Force. You're going to talk about cashing checks.
Right. There was one thing I did notice really stuck with me for some reason was when they parachute into the mission and they lose one of the dozen off screen.
Yeah, there's like he broke his neck. Okay.
It never bothered me until this time.
I would agree.
One way to
I noticed that this time they just totally wrote him off.
They got the Hispanic guy out.
Again, the saddest part to me was again Franco, who I think he and Jim Brown, their characters Jim Brown again wasn't really ever a bad character, but Franco I think redeemed himself, and they were driving away, and he was like, "We made it," and then he gets shot, and then I'm like, still breaks my heart. But again, Cassavetes I think was my favorite part of the movie. So
well, it's interesting knowing that this is that classic of the genre. It's funny. I would still say like the Navarone movies are higher up in my estimation, even though so I would put this one behind Navarone movies and Where Eagles Dare, even though it's probably like the earliest template. Well, no, Guns of Navarone was before this.
Yeah, it's not as I think it's certainly not as serious of a movie as those. But I don't know if Eagles when Eagles Dares. I mean, did the Misfits make a Dirty Dozen song? I don't think so. But it's not
just a song title. It's not actually.
I know it's not. But my wife and my daughter both sing it when it comes on my playlist. Because how could you not? But this is when you think of a mission movie, this is what you think of. I don't think of Guns of Navarone first. It's probably a better movie. But this is the movie I think of. I don't even think of Inglourious Bastards. Yeah, this is it. Men on a mission. Let's go do it. It's a suicide mission. We're not coming back. Let's just go do it.
The lurid aspect of them being all criminals.
Yeah. And it's like, hey, well, and what's even better, and I didn't catch this the first time I watched it, maybe the 5th or 6th time I watched it. It's, hey, you know what your reward is if you do it? You get to go back to the army and fight.
Well, you don't die in prison.
You don't die in prison. You just get to go back and fight, right? At which point, okay, I guess at that point in the war, it wasn't the end of the war. There's a good chance. There's a good chance you're going to see some combat if you were going back in the lines, and Might have been dying there. I don't know if it would have been better to die in prison. I don't know. Although I think half of the group
I would choose the chance to fight
and
over
redeem yourself.
being in prison the rest.
You have a chance.
But I
Prison
think
is awful.
But I think about half of them though. We're gonna be put to death if I recall relatively quickly. I mean, it wasn't even like more than a month. You're gonna die in the next couple weeks,
which is why they showed the execution in the first scene.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So the Dirty Dozen. Yeah. I mean, it's great. Don't get me wrong. I'm a huge Navarone guy. So like, that's why I did those movies first. But the Dirty Dozen is the template. It's the one that has the name that you can, throw around, as a comp. Yeah. All the time. And for a good reason, because it's the
people
template.
who've never even seen it know it just by that name.
And it holds up. I mean, it holds up. Guns of Navarone holds up. Force 10 holds up. Force 10's a little bit more weird. Although I recently found,
I liked Force 10.
I know you do, but I recently saw a paperback of that, and they're right on the paperback. It looks like Apollo Creed. So I'm like, hey, look, he's right there on the paperback too. Which again, but they're good, but it's not like when I think of this, I'm like, it's quintessential. I think they're all essential viewing.
Yeah.
It's interesting pairing this one with Cross of Iron. Again, I think. Yeah, I don't know. What you've seen a lot of these now, David. What's your favorite Men on a Mission one you've seen so far?
I think Where Eagles Dare is probably the best. But my personal favorite is Force 10.
Guns. Oh, Force 10.
Force 10. I like Force 10 more than Guns.
Yeah.
Oh, see, I didn't. I just felt the Force 10 again. I really felt that style. I did. I just did, and it seemed forced. Well, no pun intended.
Force
but it
10.
Did.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, as far as this genre goes, I think Where Eagles Dare is pretty hard to beat. But yeah, that's just me.
Look, and I don't know if you're going to do Inglourious Bastards, but you could pair that with the original Inglourious Bastards too, which really is just a name only.
I want to do the classics. I'm waiting for Dev to do Bridge Too Far. So
I watched that with you and John Shipper at 3:15. I watched it with him because I remember John was doing the whistling at the end with the Bridge Too Far with Obi-Wan.
I watched it during that era, so I just didn't remember.
Kill him. It's a great movie, but what's interesting is Inglourious Bastards. Quentin Tarantino seems to take from all of these movies because he clearly he grew up on these movies, right? He takes from all of these movies and he mushes them all together, and then does.
That's what in Five Graves to Cairo we talked a lot about because that's in his top 10 movies. So
and then he does the ballsiest thing in the world, which makes me happy. The end of that movie just still makes me happy. So whatever. Maybe it's because I'm Jewish, or maybe it's because I'm American. It doesn't matter.
All right,
you're just a human. That kind of makes you feel like
just being a human made me feel good about the end of that movie.
Getting rid of that.
Yeah, it was great.
All right, so I think that will do it for Cross of Iron and Dirty Dozen. I think Bridge Too Far and Paratroop Command from the 40s are the ones that we're gonna do next. So I know Dev's going to be here. I'm not sure which one of the other of the crew will be here, depending upon timing. But the next one we do in this series will be that one. On this here podcast, I think I'm not sure what's coming up next, actually. So we probably Brian Asman's. We're reading Brian Asman's new book. So
I'm reading I just started reading his other book. Fuck this man, fuck this house.
Fuck this house.
Which is pretty fun. It's fun.
Yeah.
I saw you had a new book out. I know Tremblay's got a new book out too.
It's not out yet.
Stories.
No,
it's not out yet.
Yeah,
it's not out yet. But and we were lucky because I told him to drop it off on the porch, and I was lucky that the dog wasn't able to go out and bite him because I didn't think about that when he came over that Yeah, long story. Anyways, so on that note, Brian did not get bit by Barney. And so probably I'm planning on having Brian on to talk about his book here soon. So that'll probably be next. That being said, I don't know, Dino, do you want people to find you?
At Dino Parenti on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook.
And
Yeah.
Threads now.
I
Right.
haven't committed yet, but
You haven't
probably
committed yet?
eventually.
Okay.
Once Twitter,
Yeah,
Mark, do you want people to
hopefully.
find you?
They can find me on this channel whenever I'm on here as a guest of yours, which I thoroughly enjoy being. And I understand that I'm a loud, talkative guy, and I just am happy that you still have me on. So there you go.
Hey, the last time Mark and I hung out, we held a piece of Edgar Allan Poe's hair.
It was fantastic. You know, the Frankenstein thing is what blew me away more than anything.
First
And I'm like,
edition.
shouldn't we be wearing gloves? Yeah, it's like $500 million, it's like $500 million or whatever. I don't know what it was, however
What were you
much it
guys
was.
holding?
And she's like, no, wearing gloves actually is not what you want to do. And I'm like, oh, okay. Well, this goes against
We went to
everything
the Lilly
The first
Library at
edition?
IU, special collections, got a tour.
First
And
edition Frankenstein, and it
Ooh.
was the Edgar Allan Poe's hair. It was awesome. I have another book still to send to you, Dave, and we'll do this off the podcast, but I'm waiting to catch a couple other books and put them in a box for you. So
yeah, I think also we held the straight out of the typewriter hand typed manuscript for Goldfinger too there. That
Wow.
was yeah.
with handwritten scenes in it, the golf scene that he hand wrote into the script or the manuscript, not the script.
Yep.
It was amazing stuff.
Yeah. And that's the Lilly Library in Bloomington, Indiana.
Cool.
And you can go visit there, the Kurt Vonnegut Museum and the Ray Bradbury Center. Oh yeah, I'm going to have the guy from the Ray Bradbury Center on. That'll be coming up soon too. So on that note, everybody stay tuned.
One last thing, order David's book.
Yes, order The Last Night to Kill Nazis. It's coming soon, and it all starts with Hitler shooting himself and trying to kill as many Nazis as we can before they surrender, and a vampire.
It's a good start, I think, to a book, by the way.
Excellent kickoff, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. On that note, we'll see everybody next time.
All right.